It's been a while since I did one of these sit-down chatty videos. So recently I was approached by a major publisher with one of their forthcoming tarot decks to review for a possible endorsement. These are those blurbs that you see where, we talk about how awesome the deck or the book is, hopefully to sway buyers. Anyway, the deck was being propped up as a tarot deck for the 21st century, like, how the Marseille deck reflected the European Renaissance in terms of its culture, or the Rider-Waite Smith reflected Art Nouveau, and the Thoth deck was futurism and reflected the contemporary culture of the World War II era. So they were saying that this deck that this person had created was the deck of 2019. It's the deck for the 21st century. Kept kind of hyping it up as tapping into today's culture and society. It also talked about how it strived to tap into the universal Jungian archetypes, yada yada. One of the first things I noticed was there was basically zero diversity in the cards, and many of the human figures were white and in colonial dress. There were 2 people of color pictured out of 78 cards, and both of them were tribal looking. Yeah, so white people looked colonial and the people of color looked tribal. Oh, and 0 Asians, but there are never Asians pictured on tarot or oracle cards unless it's literally called the Chinese tarot or whatever, you know what I mean? So forget that part, but yeah, even though tarot books from the 1700s to the early 1900s all say that tarot was Chinese, read it, they all say it was Chinese and it went to Egypt and that's how it got to Europe. But, let's just not include the Asians. It's okay. I'm super used to it. Here's the thing. I actually wrote up and prepared a positive endorsement for this deck, and I was about to send it in. Ethnic diversity issues be damned, right? I thought as a person of color, I was being overly sensitive, and I mean, what? Just because I don't see Asians, I can't give it a good review? What the hell? Who am I, right? So I just really felt like I was being overly sensitive, even borderline paranoid, and kind of a snowflake, because all things considered, it was a really cool deck. It was a really, really cool tarot deck. So objectively, I was like, I can give my endorsement because I really love the premise. I thought the guidebook was well written. So this diversity issue, forget the Asian part, just in terms of general multicultural diversity, I'm just being sensitive, not all tarot decks need to be ethnically diverse or whatever. So just relax, right? Okay, but the reality, if I'm being super honest with myself, something deep down, something still didn't sit right with me. I couldn't put my finger on why something didn't sit right with me. So, maybe I think it was because it was touted as this modern 21st century tarot deck for our times. And, the best they could do was come up with colonial looking white figures and tribal looking people of color, and only 2 of those. So, I mean, but then I'm being overly sensitive. So before I sent in my written endorsement, positive endorsement, my blurb for this tarot deck, again, because something wasn't sitting right with me and I couldn't put my finger on why, I reached out privately in closed circuits with, a group of my really close friends who all also happen to be very well-established, well-known figures in the tarot world. I mean, these people, their names. And apparently, many of them also, like me, so I wasn't the only one, obviously, they also actually got approached by the publisher to give their endorsements of the deck. And guess what? All of them said no. So here's the thing. They're white and well-established in the tarot community, and they used their platform, their voice, and their power to basically be an ally. Here I am, a person of color, and I was all wishy-washy, what do I do? Am I being too sensitive? Am I being a snowflake? And these white public figures took a very hard-nosed stand and declined to give their endorsements on the very grounds that I intuited was oh, am I just being a snowflake? So they were like, this has 0 diversity in it of any kind, and you're saying it's a 21st century modern tarot deck? What? So they all said no, when I'm sitting here ooh, what should I do? So that was kind of what prompted this video, I think. I just wanted to say thanks. in a very generic, I don't know. I guess what I want to say is that so much of the progressive direction tarot and oracle deck art has gone in today that you consumers see is because of allies. It's not people like me. No, I did not help in any way whatsoever. It's people who have more clout and who are using that clout to take a stand and advocate on behalf of those who either don't have a seat at the table or who, like me, were given a seat at the table but were too chicken to speak up. The whole time, I was being an idiot debating whether or not to speak up, second guessing myself, like, oh, maybe I'm just seeing something wrong. White allies spoke up and took a very hard-lined stand and said, no, this deck is not what we want to see in our community in this day and age. And basically, you and the consumer public will never know who these people are, these unsung heroes who behind the scenes advocated on behalf of POCs like me, who didn't have to, like they totally did not have to in any way, and no one will ever know whether they did or did not. But they did anyway, and they used their prestige and power to take a stand. And in that little ripple effect, that way, they made a huge difference. What they do is they mobilize change behind the scenes, change they will never get the credit for. I think the question of diversity in tarot and oracle decks is an interesting one, and there really isn't an easy answer. As a deck creator, since I drew my own tarot deck, I did all of the artwork, and when I was drawing it, I didn't even intend on selling it, so I can offer my perspective on the creative process, like the pure form creative process, where I wasn't really thinking about marketability, social norms, like none of that factored in when I was just drawing my tarot deck. I did not try to include diversity in my deck, and looking back, while I was, doodling the artwork, diversity was just not even on my mind. It was I was somewhere else, but, I just wasn't even thinking about diversity in any way whatsoever. I just knew I wanted to work with an art style that reflected Hermetic thought, other things, but not in any way was I like, oh, it has to be inclusive. But something kind of interesting to me, it was interesting to me that came through sort of unconsciously or subconsciously was that so the court cards in my tarot deck that I drew, they're depicted in a way that's more gender fluid, where some male essence was presenting more as feminine and female essence was presented more as masculine. And that was in no way a social commentary. It was kind of the opposite of social commentary. I wanted to peel back the layers of social and physical forms and norms and try to directly illustrate how I perceive spirit. And I guess when I peel back the layers of social norms to really look at spirit, I saw spirit as gender non-conforming. When an artist in pure form at the subconscious level only sees people of one race, they only see all white people, or they only see cisgender conformity, or in the case of this tarot deck that I was talking about, saw white people specifically in colonial dress and people of color in tribal outfits. I think that says something. And as a spiritual community, if you're working with a tarot deck on any spiritual or psychic level at all, any empathic level at all, trying to tap into the collective universal unconscious, I think that's worth noting, right? You're looking at the collective unconscious. You're looking at something you're saying is universal Jungian archetypes, and all you see are white people in colonial dress and people of color, no Asians, just people, other people of color in tribal outfits. That's interesting. Here's the funny thing about that specific deck I mentioned. After so many big name tarot authors and deck creators said no to endorsing and pointed out the lack of diversity issue for a 21st century modern tarot deck, the deck creator decided to erase all mention of it being a 21st century deck. Basically, in a choice between adding diversity to the artwork or changing your whole premise of your deck, the whole premise and point of view, like, do you add diversity and continue calling it a 21st century tarot deck, or do you eliminate referral of it as a 21st century deck and keep it, without the diversity? This deck creator chose to eliminate any mention of it being a 21st century tarot deck and just went with the art as is. So you want to talk about the issue of artistic license, right? Okay, here's another thing. Another aspect of the deck that was problematic was that the deck actually denigrated several modern tarot decks, basically calling certain modern tarot decks fluffy and erasing all the mysticism and deep spirituality from tarot. So as a member of the tarot community, I did point this out to the publisher and deck creator that, hey, look, anyone who has been part of the tarot community in any way whatsoever knows exactly which tarot decks you're talking about and which tarot publishers you're talking about. Like, you didn't use their names, but we all know from the context clues, you could point out the names with specificity. So I was like, just like a hint, I don't know if that's smart. I don't know if it's smart to denigrate well-known tarot decks and deck publishers in your guidebook. And the deck creator acknowledged that was probably not the right way to go. So those passages from the guidebook were edited out. So they're gone. They're no longer part of the guidebook. In terms of creative license, you self-censored to avoid offending people in power. Well-known publishers and well-known deck creators, you didn't want to offend them. You realized, oh, I offended them, so I'm going to self-censor and edit those parts out and sacrifice my creative license. But in terms of that same creative license, you chose as a deck creator not to self-censor to avoid offending people of color. So how do you think that makes POCs feel? Like, when I was presented with that information, how do you think that made me feel? Like, okay, so if you could have potentially risked offending powerful publishers and deck creators, you were like, nope, I'm going to take a back seat with my creative license and edit that out so I don't offend them. But when presented with the possibility that your deck art might offend people of color, you were like, nope, creative license, I'm not going to edit that out. So I guess perceiving that juxtaposition, like bam, bam, right, like back to back, it made me feel like as a person of color, I was insignificant and my feelings were insignificant. Another reason I wanted to make this video is to say thank you. You know who you are. I was a wuss. I punked out. I was ready to give my positive endorsement and praise the deck, and you would have no idea any of this behind the scenes stuff even went on, that I had any sort of turmoil. Like, I was a total wuss. Sellout maybe? I don't know. But I was ready to overlook the diversity issue because I thought I was being overly paranoid or sensitive or a snowflake. If it had not been for these big name tarot people, and you know exactly who you are if you're watching this, if they did not speak up first and tell me that they spoke up, I would not have had the guts to speak up. And that's the truth. That's sad and pathetic, and you can say a lot of negative things about me for that, and I would be like, yeah, that's true. It's pathetic, but I'm just telling you that that's the reality. That's really what happened. I was not brave. I was not a leader. I was a follower. I did not have the guts to say something until I saw that other people had the guts to say something. So as a person of color, even one with some privilege of a seat at the table, I want to say thank you to all of the allies out there who do speak up, who do put their name and prestige, reputation, and platform on the line to speak up on behalf of those who aren't present and those who, like me, didn't have the guts to speak up, even though we were present. I think if you are not a person of color and you are rolling your eyes right now and thinking, oh my effing goodness, what is with all this diversity in tarot and oracle deck talk about anyway? Why do we need it? I don't want to talk about it. I just want to talk about tarot decks. I just want to talk about oracle decks. I don't want to think about social justice and politics and diversity when I'm talking about tarot and oracle decks. I feel you. I completely feel you. But I'm a tarot snob, big time. And initially I thought, I wanted to keep tarot pure, whatever the fuck that means, right? But I thought this whole conversation about having to depict diversity, any kind of diversity, ethnic diversity, LGBTQ plus I diversity, like the whole concept of diversity in tarot and oracle decks was stupid. And let's just talk tarot. Let's keep the conversation about the cards. And then, for the first time in recent years, I started to see myself in tarot and oracle decks, meaning there were Asian females depicted on certain modern tarot and oracle decks that were published in the last decade. I didn't even know how not okay it was for me to get used to not seeing myself in tarot and oracle deck art until I saw myself in tarot and oracle deck art. Does that make any sense? I didn't even realize how insignificant I was being treated, as in people in power felt like I was so insignificant that I didn't even need to be considered in their representations of the world, of culture and society and spirituality, until one person, somebody out there with the power, decided, no, that's not how I'm going to do things. I'm going to consider diversity. So it wasn't until somebody else who didn't have to decided to consider the issue of diversity and presented me in a tarot or oracle deck that I actually realized I was not even present. It wasn't until someone with creative power and the creative license to decided I was worthy of representation that I realized that I was worthy of representation. Is that sad?